Hi, everyone. Welcome to Strada's webinar today on From College to Career, Students' Internship Expectations and Experiences. We have a great webinar planned today to present research as well as practitioners in the field. So we will give folks just a minute or two here to log on. As you're logging on, we'd encourage you to put your name and your organization in the chat so that we can all get to know each other. We've got a large crowd joining us today, so it'd be great to build out our network and understanding folks who are really interested in work-based learning and internships. So again, we'll pause here for a moment and let folks log on. Takla, Melissa, thank you for putting your name and organization in the chat. It's great. We've got a lot of higher ed leaders, policymakers joining us today, community organizations who are doing great work around work-based learning. So thank you so much for joining us. It's fun to see we've got folks joining from all across the country here. And on our panel today, I think we're in all different time zones joining in from across the country as well. This is great. Thanks everyone for putting your name and organization in the chat. We'll give folks maybe one more minute to continue to log on. Thanks for those who are putting in LinkedIn links. It's always great to build our networks there. Fantastic. Well, we are at 2 minutes after, and we have lots of folks joining. Let's see, we'll hit the 100 participants here, and we will get going. I think we'll have well over that. So again, welcome to everyone. My name is Courtney Macbeth. I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Program Officer here at Strada. I'm really excited to have all of you join today. Public Viewpoint is a webinar series that Strada launched during the pandemic. During the pandemic, we presented every other week on cutting edge research to help higher ed leaders, policymakers, workforce leaders understand American sentiment around education and training after high school. And we've been in a strategic planning period and a little bit of a reboot. And we're so excited that this is our first to be able to offer our first Public Viewpoint webinar of 2023. In Strada's new strategy and plan, one of our major focus areas and pillars is work-based learning, with the goal of ensuring that all students, especially those who face the greatest barriers, have access to quality paid work-based learning experiences. So work-based learning and internships has a fairly large evidence base in the field around effectiveness. And we're excited to join with many experts who are joining in on as participants today, as well as our panelists, to just further the conversation, thinking about how to increase access to and quality, and what are the important dimensions to ensure quality work-based learning experiences to help students both with their academic success and their success beyond completion into careers and career pathways. So again, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll continue to have folks put their name and their organizations in the chat. Let me quickly do an introduction of our panel. And then for those who are new, the format that we typically do is we have one of our research team members present our primary research in the report, which we'll release today. And then we'll go into a lively discussion with our panelists for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open up to Q&A. So we're really trying to engage all of you who are here on the chat to make sure we surface your questions and engage you in the conversation. So first off, let me introduce Julia Freeland Fisher. She's the Director of Education Research at the Clayton Christensen Institute. Many of you may know her book, which is called Who You Know: Unlocking Innovations That Expand Students' Networks. Julia does a lot around thinking about social capital and networks and how to ensure and mobilize economic mobility for students through social capital and networks. So thanks for joining us, Julia. Dr. Kenyatta Lovett is Managing Director for Higher Education and Workforce at Educate Texas. He's had other statewide roles in other states and really brings a great national perspective in thinking about how to design strategies to connect degrees and credential attainment for workforce outcomes. Thanks for joining us, Kenyatta. And Marshall Strawbridge, who was a Jackie Robinson Fellow and a 2021 graduate of Manhattan College. We've had the privilege of getting to know Marshall over the past several years. Marshall began his career in public service with an internship. Now he's playing a key role at Bronx Economic Development Corporation as Director of Outreach, and really brings a great perspective in terms of having done internships and how that can path into careers. And then Dr. Samya Ghosh is Senior Research Analyst on our Strada research team, one of our newest members. We're excited to have Samya on our team. She brings 15 years of research experience in psychology and higher education with applied data science and quantitative methods as ways to study education and outcomes. So with that, Samya, I'm going to turn the time over to you to present our research findings today on internship gaps. And as Samya pulls up her slides and begins, in the chat, we will put a link to the LinkedIn report on our research today. And we'd encourage you all, if you want to stay connected with each other, to please click on that LinkedIn link, and you can tag your organization in the comments section so that we can stay connected and elevate the work that you're doing and otherwise. And we'll put that link in at the end again. So again, if you go over to LinkedIn, you can look at the report and tag your organization. All right, we'll turn it over to you, Samya.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're excited to present findings from our college students' internship interest and participation from the National Survey of Student Engagement today. A little bit about the survey before I share our findings. Over 500 institutions participate in the National Survey of Student Engagement to learn about their undergraduate students' experiences. We've co-developed with NESI a career and workforce preparation module that's added to the survey, and it was used by 105 US institutions with 59,807 students responding to the survey. The career and workforce preparation module includes in-depth questions that explore students' career plans, influences on their goals, their confidence and work-related skills, career exploration in curriculum, and use of career services. An important feature of the NESI is that it includes an expansive definition of internships. When respondents are asked about their participation in internships, the question actually includes internships, co-ops, field experience, student teaching, or clinical placement. As I share findings from our study using NESI, I want to highlight that we specifically want to understand first-year college students' intention to participate in internships, as well as examine senior students' internship participation using cross-sectional data. First, let's take a look at trends in interest to participate in internships at the first year level versus senior student participation among all students who participated in NESI from 2013 to 2022. We see that both intent and participation are fairly consistent, with a slow erosion from 2013 to 2022. This suggests that the gap between intent and participation is not due to increased levels of interest over time, but instead a mismatch between intent and opportunity. The first thing that I want to share is that internship participation is lower than interest. We found that overall, 70% of first-year students expect to participate in internships. However, participation by those who are seniors is much lower. 48% of seniors who report having participated in or are in the process of completing an internship. Also in our study, we see wide variation by institution. When we analyzed each institution individually, the first year intent to participate ranges from 46% to 90%. And by senior year participation in internships ranges from 10% to 95%. We also found that when we disaggregate by gender, overall women and men have similar intent and participation gaps. 72% of first-year women have the highest intent to participate in internships when compared to others. Participation by senior year is similar among all groups and highest among those who report as another gender identity at 55%. When we disaggregate our data by first-generation status using parents' level of education, we found that first-generation first-year students report lower intention to participate in internships when compared to first-year students who are not of first-generation status. And similarly, by senior year participation in internships is lower among students who are of first-generation status. The difference between the two groups in participation rates is 14%. Nearly 3 times the difference in interest levels, which is at 5%. We're also interested in capturing any gaps in intent and participation in internships by field of study. We found that seniors in arts and humanities, social sciences, and business have the lowest participation in internships when compared to all other fields of study. You'll notice that intent and participation is especially high in the field of education. This observation could be due to the fact that survey internship participation question includes teaching or clinical experience as part of the question, as these are routine requirements for graduation among education majors. The only other field of study with an interest participation gap is for communications, media, and public relations, and the gap is at 15%. Here, a key takeaway is that while first-year students' intent to participate in internships remains high, regardless of field of study, levels of participation remain far lower than expectations. I'd like to now walk us through findings from a statistical model to understand internship intention. We really wanted to answer if demographic differences we see could be explained by differences across fields of study. And to explore this, we ran a series of statistical models to control for field of study, race and ethnicity, first-generation status, and age. We found that even after controlling for these variables, Asian and Black African-American first-year students have higher predicted probabilities of intention to participate in internships when compared with all other first-year students. You can see this in the heat map here, where Asian and Black African-American columns have the most number of green boxes, indicating higher probabilities of intention to participate in internships. Okay, so we just looked at intent to participate. Now let's take a look at internship participation. In our statistical model that controls for field of study, race and ethnicity, first-generation status, and age, we also found that Black and African-American and Hispanic or Latino seniors have the lowest predicted probabilities of participation in internships when compared with all other senior students. You can see this reflected in the heat map with more boxes in the Black and African-American and Hispanic or Latino columns that are shaded red to orange. This means that seniors who are in either of these racial groups are disproportionately underrepresented with internship participation opportunities. Finally, let's look at the difference in predicted probabilities of first-year students' intention to participate in internships and participation by senior year. What we found is that when compared to white students, Black African-American students have the biggest gaps between intent and participation in 5 out of the 10 disciplines. When compared to white students, Asian students have the largest gaps between intent and participation. This means that while there's an overall mismatch between intent to participate and participation by senior year in internships, Asian and Black African-American students face disproportionate challenges in accessing internship opportunities in especially business, engineering, and health profession disciplines. Additionally, we also found that students who report internship participation also report stronger feelings of confidence about communicating their knowledge, skills, and experience to potential employers. Overall, 80% of seniors who participated in an internship reported their confidence in communicating their skills to potential employers, compared with 68% of seniors who did not participate in an internship. In conclusion, we offer 3 findings from the study. First, the majority of first-year students report that they expect to complete an internship. Second, we found gaps between intent and participation by senior year, even after controlling for field of study, age, race, and first-generation status. Black or African American and Hispanic or Latino senior students are significantly less likely to have participated in an internship. Third, we found that internship participation is associated with seniors' level of confidence to communicate their knowledge, skills, and experience to potential employers. Finally, the study offers several opportunities for future research to explore gaps in participation, challenges in access, and completion of internships would just deepen our knowledge on ways to better support students' career preparation. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Courtney, who's going to be leading our discussion today. Courtney?
Soumya, thank you so much for your work and effort on the research and the presentation today. For clarification, in the study, we used Nessie's definition of internship. So I just want to circle back to that includes clinicals, co-ops, internships, field experiences, and student teaching. So we're using that terminology of internship broadly as we extract and offer insights from the internship data from those 105 institutions. So let's dig in here a little bit. I want to first ask the panelists about the first finding, which is intent versus actual participation, this internship gap of first-year students who 70% of freshmen are saying they expect or want to do an internship. Now, ideally, I think we'd all like that to be 100%, right? The work we're doing, we're trying to get that intent to 100%. And then versus that senior year of, less than half students actually completing an internship. So Julia, what's your reaction to this research finding? Like what is happening between the first year and the last year where half of students are not completing an internship?
Yeah, thanks, Courtney, and thanks, Soumya, for the really clear presentation of the research. And I think as the Strada team was alluding to in the chat, they're digging in on this exact question. So some hypotheses I had looking at the data, I think it tells us some things both about the demand side, who is looking for internships, but also about the supply side, what is available to students. On the demand side, maybe this goes without saying, but I just want to name it. I think there can be really problematic assumptions about students and their views of the world of work when you just look at participation data. And you could diagnose that partly as an awareness or motivation gap. Students don't know internships matter or they're not motivated. And what the data is showing us is that instead of an awareness or motivation gap, I'd hazard that there's sort of a connection and support gap. Something is happening in between freshman and senior year where that awareness and motivation is neither being nurtured nor sort of met with a supply of meaningful opportunities. Sort of double clicking on that connection piece, as Courtney mentioned, I sort of only think about social capital all day, every day. And part of the reason I'm so interested in the concept of social capital is that we know from the research that an estimated half of jobs come through personal connections. A few years ago, the Center for Research on College Workforce Transitions, which historically ran the National College Internship Study that's now housed at Strada, in fact, but Matthew Hora, the lead researcher there, found that 53% of interns partaking in internships in 2020 found those opportunities through family, professor, or other personal connections. So part of this idea of how do you translate your ambition into action is, do you have the connections you need to make sense of opportunities in the world? Now, that doesn't have to be something as problematic as sort of a nepotistic hire, but it's even people making you aware of what opportunities are out there, perhaps beyond just big name companies you may be looking at. Just quickly, I think what this is telling us on the supply side, though, is that companies and organizations are not totally persuaded around the ROI of internships. If there's a market failure, if more students want internships, that there are possibilities. There's some education to be done on the employer side here. And I think understandably, the costs of designing and supervising internship experiences may seem daunting. So hopefully, Courtney, we can get into who are some of the players in the space, I think, stepping into absorb or assist employers in managing those costs and actually offering more opportunities to ambitious and willing students out there.
That's great. Thank you, Julie. And I'll just note that we've got lots of questions surrounding, different definitions and types of internships, as we use that term more broadly, and then the implications of that, of the different types, depending on field of study and whether or not they're required within a certain discipline. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. Thank you for all the great comments and questions and insights in the chat. So Kenyatta, as you think about these gaps, curious your perspective and from personal and your professional experience.
Yeah, this is a conversation that comes back full circle for me. I in high school was fortunate, and Julie, you made some great points about the connection. I participated in a program that's still around called Inroads, and it was an internship program for African-American students in engineering or business. It's now expanded to the Latino population and other types of industries. We spent, I think, a full summer after the junior year in high school of just prepping for the internship, having notable speakers, learning about dress codes and etiquette and you name it. I mean, it was literally an entire summer where most kids would probably want to go and work and make money. We spent our time in classrooms and boardrooms. I was fortunate to work for American Airlines when I got my first internship out of high school in budgets and cost. Background, my father and my mother are both professionals and college grads. And so the transition for me was a lot easier, but for a lot of my colleagues, that experience in high school got them prepped to be okay in Inroads. To note, I believe there are 2 Black CEOs from the Inroads program since its inception. TIAA has a CEO, female CEO, and I think Walgreens maybe, I think their CEOs from the Inroads program as well, or at least one of them. But it speaks to the power of what happens when you do connect young professionals to these opportunities, and also the structure. And to your point, totally agree with you, Julia. The employer has to have some structure as well to be supportive of what students are going through. I bring this back full circle because I'm in Seattle, and I just before this call listened to youth talk about their feedback on youth apprenticeships and apprenticeship programs. And one thing that came out really clear, Courtney, that I want to sort of highlight. Go back to Julia. Yes, the connection gaps are there. The process gaps are there for people to even know how to engage in internships. One thing I found really useful that they said that really made me reflect on my experiences is that they feel like they don't often get good feedback from employers or adults. And they feel like the fact that they're sparing their feelings doesn't allow them to get real about what they need to work on and how they need to get there. So the report makes really good sense. My focus is really on where there's a gender gap or where there's a gap for race and ethnicity, that we assume that people are ready to go into an internship and do well. And so there needs to be some type of buffering of a program that really walks them through it. And unfortunately, what we see is when they're hit senior year in college, if they haven't had the internship or that experience, back to the social capital, they're at a disadvantage to their peers.
Great. Thank you, Kenyatta. And Marshall, would love to have you weigh in here.
Sure, thank you. I really would just double down on what Julia and Kenyatta have shared. I think that they're absolutely right to point to this supply and demand issue. One thing that I would point out, and I can speak with a little bit of authority from this, having been a recent college student. There's a real sense, and I think the data bears this out. I have a real sense that for many students, doing an internship is a given. Many students understand that in order to be competitive upon graduation, you've got to have completed internships before graduating college. I think that where that assumption or where that mindset is flawed is a lot of students also think that getting an internship is a given. And one of the things that I would point to as perhaps one of the most determining factors, or one of the weightiest factors in the quality of experience and the ability to get an internship, is timeline. Kenyatta pointed to an external organization inroads, pushing them in terms of getting internships. I had the Jackie Robinson Foundation. We were talking about, or Strada, JRF, they were asking us what our plans for summer internships were in the winter break. We're thinking about what is it that I want to be doing. Spring break, you should be applying or have applied to a number of good internships. But I kid you not, I'm sure that there are students out there today thinking, I've got to figure out what I'm going to do for the summer. It's too late for a lot of the most productive internships that students want. A lot of them are filled at times like this. And so I think one area where you can get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of improving that number is timeline, encouraging students to get after it much earlier than is natural for perhaps the average student.
That's great. And Marshall, from your experience being, a recent grad and with your group of friends and otherwise, I mean, where are students going to find internships and what works and what are some of the challenges in terms of finding the opportunities?
So I'll say that at least at my school, I found that the career center, I went to the college career center at my school like the first few weeks of being there. And my impression of it was that it wasn't gonna be terribly valuable for me as someone who was going to be doing that research and looking for stuff on my own. I felt that it was very much tailored, which there's definitely a need for this. It was very much tailored for students who weren't gonna go out and looking for what are the internships in the sectors that I'm interested in. How could I maybe intern? I will say that what was successful for me was wearing my interests on my sleeves with the professors that I knew could connect me with the opportunities that I was interested in. And that was for every job that I've had, both internships in school and now post-grad have been a result of that. I currently work for a professor/administrator who was at Manhattan College while I was there. My first job was at an organization where my political science professor was a member of the board of directors. And I worked for 2 congressional staffers who were former political science students. Each of those experiences were the direct result of me wearing my ambitions on my sleeve with professors. And I think that in the cases of my peers who've had the most successful internship experiences, that's been their path as well.
That's a great point, Marshall, about the key role of faculty and faculty feeling like this is part of their role in transforming lives, is connecting students and making students aware of the opportunities. Julie, I'd love to have you weigh in here on this question as well.
Yeah, I just think, so there's the danger in this conversation that we treat all internships as like Eden, where everything works out for you. So hopefully we'll get into like, internships are obviously created differently, but I do think that in the data, internship participation is a lagging indicator of a number of smaller activities that students are or aren't participating in, exactly to Marshall's point. Strada actually released a report in 2021 that Nicole or Somia can put into the chat, but looking at sort of this same intent participation gap occurring across lines of networking, informational interviewing, and to Marshall's point, engaging with career services. Now, on that last one, like if we're going to solve the internship gap, we need to have a conversation about how abysmal career services is right now as a function on many campuses when it comes to actually doing the work of creating return on investment for students. The ratios are broken. The perception of utility, to Marshall's point, is quite low, sort of staggeringly low. Gallup found that only about half of college grads reported visiting their career services and about the same number found them helpful. So that's not to knock on the hardworking staff at those places, but they are not designed to be in regular contact and part of the workflow of college students' experiences early or often enough to actually address this gap. So I just think it's overwhelming to talk about it this way, but we're looking at the effect of a number of interventions that aren't strong enough early and often enough in college students' experiences. And to just focus on making students more likely to apply to internships would, I think, be short-sighted to having a broader conversation around networking, informational interviewing, faculty student relationships, and career services, all as a bundle of functions that have for too long been at the periphery of the college experience. Oh, you're muted.
Julia, great point. And I see that Judith Spitz kind of mentioned that as well, of like, how do we think about infusing this responsibility across different entities and different roles on campus around the need to do quality career coaching and help students understand the connection and the paths from their education experience into the workplace. It's really, really good. I want to pull on this thread of thinking about what are the different key features in program design and different types of internship models that we're seeing out there. Bob Casalucci, his question about, given that doing an internship is a given, why would this not be built directly into higher ed curriculum? So it happens by design. So it's embedded. And Roy Swift was noting the healthcare examples and the importance of timing, credit, pay embedded, some of these key design features. So Kenyatta, weigh in on what you're seeing are some, important design features that we should be thinking about in designing effective programs.
Sure. And I question if higher education institutions will ever have the capacity to provide those supports. And I think where we've seen it to be much more successful is whether it's a regional effort or it's a stronger organization like an Inroads that has the programming with employers, has the connectivity to the populations that we want to serve. So, to the point of all the connecting pieces that Julia mentioned, I think it's got to be a networked approach versus an institutional approach in order for it to work. Where I have seen it be much more successful at scale has been specifically around multiple partners, networks coming together. And I think the issue around the career center at the college, it for me and from my experiences as a professor and even at a college, I probably would trust the advisors of those within my department or college more so than one specific center. So what I've seen to be much more successful is when a department chair or a dean or that president connects to a larger industry association, talks about capacity, works with economic development and even workforce development in their region, and figures out how they can actually make this available to the vast majority of students, understanding that when you get to scale, you also water down the connection, but more importantly, you want to give that exposure to the students. So I love the ambition on the sleeve, and that's just not necessarily the strong suit of most students, but the ones that I've seen work the best have been more of a regional approach to the work, and also more of an industry specific approach. And I think healthcare and the way in which academia is required to have residencies and other types of work-based learning experiences is a prime example of how that connection, the students know exactly what they're going to be doing as soon as they graduate. I actually graduated with a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in graphic design and art direction, had no clue of how to connect because they didn't give us internships. Literally, I stopped that internship with Inroads the summer before my senior year, and I walked into a room and said, hey, at a place where I knew there were some designers and art directors in my town. And I said, hey, I'll work for free. Can anyone give me an internship? But I wouldn't have had that courage had I not had the internship before to know how important internships are. So, again, I don't know that institutions alone can solve this problem. I think if you look at a regional collaborative by industry, that's where I've seen stronger pipelines, more students being successful, and then more of a discussion around building local talent pipelines versus internships looking somewhat like a cost model that employers sometimes kind of shy away from.
Julia, please jump in here. I can see you nodding.
Yeah, well, thinking about design in service of equity is important here, right? Given what we saw in the data that Soumya shared. And I do want to get to sort of like, we're not talking about paid versus unpaid. And one of the barriers that I didn't mention at the beginning is one of the reasons you might not take an internship is because you're working part or full time in a job. And that trade-off does not make sense. Then we have the question of, is it a job that's part of a career pathway to the industry you're interested in, or is it a job to sustain yourself and your family? So that feels important because I think to make these opportunities equitable, they not only have to be paid, they potentially have to be flexible. In addition to which, I think there's an open question of what would it look like for more of these experiences to be credit bearing. So they're not seen as a cost on top of the time you're already putting into your degree. Now that gets, I think, really tricky for a lot of institutions. It's where we actually probably have to start talking about not just full stack internships, but things like micro internships, client projects, sort of smaller dosage, but still potentially really high payoff work experiences that students can, in a valid and candid way, put onto their resumes, but that don't maybe look like what some of us on this call are imagining as a full stack summer experience. So that feels important. The only other, I generally agree, Kenyatta, with your point that, like, if we're going to hope that higher ed institutions take this all on, like, well, we're going to be hoping for many, many years. The one example of a campus that is albeit well resourced, but I think has a template to pay attention to, is Johns Hopkins' work in life design, led by Farouk Day there. And life design is broader than just internship participation. It's a philosophy that throughout their college career, students should be pursuing their curiosities. They should be doing that with the support of faculty and mentors. And that can be in the form of research projects or internships or the like. They've managed through a whole philosophy across campus, faculty are bought in, to close first generation and continuing generation career outcomes gaps on the back end. I think it's a model to watch for higher ed leaders that are taking data like this seriously and actually want to design a philosophy on their campus that all students are pursuing their curiosities and sort of taking risks early and often that may lead into internships and ultimately high quality jobs. So that's another example to look at. Lastly, I saw this in the chat, but there are a number of organizations that we've been watching that are really building both career know-how and sort of know-who for college students in partnership with schools, like Braven, Social Capital Academy out of Cal State Fullerton, Mentors in Tech. These are all organizations that are stepping in to be active brokers of opportunity in a way that I don't know that colleges always see themselves as brokers, if that makes sense. They see themselves a lot as sort of skills and knowledge builders. So
Great, Julia. Thanks for those examples. Kenyatta.
Yeah, to that point, totally agree. I would mention seeing some great outcomes from an org called CodePath on the IT side that's doing some good internship work. And then also on the curriculum, I agree, Julie, it's probably a change in philosophy for higher ed. I was very impressed with Gutman Community College in New York, their ethnographies of work. And so it's a transition for professors to be able to connect the content to actually, what does that look like for actually the pursuits of the student? And how do you embed that in the curriculum? Maybe it's not to get into an internship, but start to create that mindset, because, I've got a graduating daughter who graduated last Sunday from college. She's not going to think about what she's going to do next, and probably till June 1, after she's partied hard enough at the end of this month. And that's what's people giving her guidance and pressure. So again, getting her into that mindset has taken quite some time of like, what's next? I think she'll be fine, but for a lot of students, they're assuming that if I graduate, then something's going to happen at the end of the road, and they have to have some more intention around that. But I do like ethnographies of work, and the one from Johns Hopkins sounds really interesting, Julia.
Good. And I'll offer up a couple other examples from our grant making that we're seeing. So in addition to these great nonprofits that are partnering closely with 2- and 4-year institutions, we've seen some universities who, for example, are transforming federal work study. So this is, a built-in federal work stream, and thinking about how to better redesign and transform federal work study to be a quality internship experience, as well as student employment on campus, how to build out a robust mentor and connection to education as an example of how to use existing resources and redesign and retool student employment on campus to be more of a quality internship or apprenticeship type experience. Now, on finding 2 that Soumya talked about, where field of study matters, and then when we control for race, ethnicity, gender, et cetera, we have fields and colleges, and like to the talent pipelines that you're talking about, Kenyatta, where in engineering, in STEM, where there's sort of these built-in colleges and schools that might have more resources, whereas we see in humanities and arts and social sciences, social services, less internship uptake. And as we look at our campus populations, there are proportionally more students of color and women typically in those majors where there are less internships. And like Jane Oates nods to this of like, how do we ensure that internships are strong for those students, particularly in areas where there's been maybe less resources and or less focus to ensure that there's required internships. And Marshall, I know you come from one of these majors and you found an internship. And so would love your perspective on that, as well as the other two, about how do we ensure that that campus leaders are thinking strategically about how to offer internships in these areas where students can benefit the most?
Is that to me? Awesome. So yes, I started, I interned for a community-based organization that has historically been very much connected with the university I attended. And I think that, I think it was Kenyatta who made a point about scale. And as you scale up, the connection is lost. And I think that being a part of and this was a work study internship as well, being a part of a smaller team really gave me a chance to be more of a generalist in a way that I think my education and background in political science and philosophy was actually an advantage. So I hadn't really spent the 4 years honing like a specific skill in accounting or graphic design or something like this. But I was really good at like reading and research and learning, which I think is a hallmark of a liberal arts education, and really embed myself in the organization as an intern. And I think that there's still a gap, even looking here in the Bronx and in New York, where we have a ton of, I mean, it's privatization of government, so there's just tons of nonprofits and community-based organizations for students to build relationships with. And I think that one area where students can, one advantage of these sorts of internships with smaller community-based organizations is it's really an opportunity where the student can bring value to the organization in a way that usually, I heard someone mention about the ROI of taking on internships isn't always great. And I as someone who supervises interns, I know that it's work. It's not just come and put in the work. It takes work to make the interns experience valuable for them, which is what I want to do. But that requires capacity. Usually, when you're talking about these smaller organizations, I think they're much more ready to take on students who maybe don't have all the credentials, but are ambitious and want to contribute to something. And it shows. I think that not only does it show in terms of how the student shows up, it shows in how the organizations choose to invest in that person. If our organization, if our mission, if our bottom line isn't dependent on you showing up in like to your fullest capabilities, then the organization is not going to be very much interested in developing that individual. However, if our organization depends on the student, even if it's a very small role that they're playing, if they're playing a role that's valuable to the organization's mission or bottom line, I trust that organization is going to be willing to invest in them, even if it's only during the time that they're there. Hopefully it's a long-term relationship and becomes a full-time job, but even if it's in the time that they're there, the employees, the staff, the organization is going to be much more likely to invest in that student and make them a better professional at the end of that experience. So yeah, I could speak for days about the value of internships with those smaller organizations in the nonprofit sector, especially as a pipeline for students in School of Liberal Arts, humanities majors, and things like that.
Great point, Marshall. Please jump in, Kenyatta.
Yeah. I was just going to say on the liberal arts front, and I'm learning a lot from Clara Menson, who brought to my attention just this week occupational segregation. And it's amazing to look at it. And I think that was what was highlighted in Saumia's report. You know, if all of a sudden philosophy students start getting paid $400,000 on average, you'll start to see probably occupational segregation even in philosophy professions. And so it's important to note that if you ever want to see it too, look at a commencement ceremony and look at the makeup of diversity in general studies versus engineering or versus something else. The challenge that I think is in front of academia right now and liberal arts is they've been good at sort of talking about the knowledge that they build within students, not so good on the skills that they build. And whether it's externships for professors and department chairs, or other types of outside consultancies that can come in and help them think about what skills are you building within your students that you don't know of, because typically they may become a CEO or an entrepreneur or something else, or an engineer or a lawyer, right? They just have the ability to and the interest of doing something else outside of sort of the sciences and the applied work. But I don't think I have not seen yet a larger approach to liberal arts and sort of helping them to translate what knowledge looks like versus what skills will look like for their students. And then at that point, I think actually the internship opportunities are endless for them because they can connect with different types of industries because of the skills that they're providing to their students.
It's great, Kenyatta. I ran for 15 years an internship program where we specifically targeted arts, social science, humanities majors, and I think you're exactly right. Of those internship experiences, helping not only the career exploration, but the identification and then communication of skills gained and how that translates into career paths. It speaks to Saumia's third finding, right, which is students who did internships reported higher level of confidence in their ability to communicate skills and knowledge and experience to employers. So that thread of that confidence and ability to identify and both and communicate those skills to employers is beneficial. Julia, thoughts?
The only thing I'd add here is we haven't mentioned the word alumni on this call. Alumni are this huge undercapitalized reservoir that for some institutions, the development office owns those people and like career services can't touch them, right? There's a dynamic there. For other institutions, there just hasn't been the infrastructure built out to really engage alumni in the work of creating opportunities for the students that come after them. But I just think that's a place to start in this sort of liberal arts humanities conversation, insofar as institutions have been pumping out humanities graduates for years and years, who have ended up, to Kenyatta and Marshall's point, in all sorts of roles. And we're not creating the right through lines short of internships for current students to even be having conversations with those individuals to understand the many pathways. None of this is linear. I suspect none of our careers on this call have been linear, but we're not creating those conversations with the literal people from your institution who have walked that path before you. So that just feels like a huge missed opportunity. Maybe more bottoms up than top down in some of the strategies that we need from an internship management standpoint, but still an opportunity nonetheless.
A great point of an untapped resource a lot of times for universities and colleges to build out employer networks. I want to take the employer.
Sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. 9% of graduates say that their alumni network was useful. Like, it's a crazy undercapitalized, right? The rate is insane to me. So sorry, keep going, just to put a number to that phenomenon.
Well, that's great. And the point around the employer piece of this, which has been a thread through the chat, is one that I think is interesting. And Marshall brings up, how we surface value and ROI for internships for employers. So Saumia, from your research, others on the panel, thoughts around the employer perspective and how we can better surface employer perspective to better connect supply and demand around internships.
Courtney, I think that'll be a future direction to include the employer perspective and to sort of understand what are some connections that employers are making with institutions to see areas where students can be connected to internships. the other thing is also the definition of internships is evolving. And so we want to understand employers' role in creating new models of internships that are either micro internships, there's sprinternships, there are hybrid models now, there's virtual internships. So we also want to understand all of that as future directions of research.
Yeah, I'll say from the employer perspective, what's been top of mind for me now is just, I believe a lot of institutions may need the services of an intermediary to work with the employers, because sometimes faculty and department chairs and deans may not be the best to sell the opportunity. Employers are going to look at it from two different ways, in my opinion. Is this a community relations effort where I can provide these experiences and it's good PR and I can have them sort of make coffee and tea and we've done a good internship, to a talent pipeline opportunity where I know you're bringing us talent, we can develop them, and hopefully a percentage of them will become employees at our company at the end of their time in college. And then that takes a little work of understanding what the employer's viewpoint is, what their sort of ROI vision is, and also what they value. And I think sometimes we put too much pressure, especially on smaller institutions, rural institutions, that they have the language, the content, the knowledge, the connections with employers for them to see the value in internships. Maybe it's an intermediary that has those relationships that can make the connection between the two.
Just to double click on what Kenyatta is saying, I actually see a real risk evolving in the field as the education side of the market awakens to the value of work-based learning, but to Kenyatta's point, is not always super steeped in how to forge those partnerships. Higher ed needs to be positioned to be stewards of students having options and opportunities, not just stewards of what employers want, right? So what is a student-centric approach to employer partnerships feels like a really urgent question if we don't want to create like basically higher ed institutions that are just serving employers' needs, not students' needs. And that role of intermediaries to balance that tension feels really important, as I think you could look at this data and just go out and form a bunch of articulation agreements with employers who are telling you exactly what they need, and you're going to create students that look exactly like that. And that's not being stewards of students' optionality. That's being stewards of exclusively employer demand. And it's a real tension that I think is only going to grow if, to Kenyatta's point, we don't have organizations that can sit in the middle of these two types of institutions.
Right. And it's a great point that there's probably not a one size fits all. It depends on the institution, the local context, leadership, what needs and talents are, depending on the institution and the region. So it's great. Thanks for teasing that out. We're going to go to the chat Q&A to just surface some questions here. So please, if you have questions, if you haven't put them in, we'd like to surface any questions that you all would like us to answer. And my colleagues, Dave and Nicole, will nudge me on those as we're in the last 10 minutes or so here. While we're waiting for those questions to go, I would just throw out to the panel while we're waiting for these questions. What are further lines of inquiry and research we should be thinking about around internships that would be helpful to the field and many of the practitioners who are joining us?
I think our panelists, Julia, Marshall, and Kenyatta, you've all raised really important future directions for research, specifically to access barriers to completion of internships for research. There are distinctions between paid internships and just unpaid internships, and being able to complete unpaid internships. So we want to be able to understand the nuances between the two. Also, I think the other thing is we'd like to understand more longitudinal analysis of similar such studies to be able to capture things like emerging definitions of internships. So as I mentioned earlier, things like sprinternships, virtual internships that are hybrid now, that are micro internships. So we want to be able to understand all of these emerging trends in internships through longitudinal analysis. So there are several directions to go for this particular topic. I think our panelists have raised really, really important issues that need to be studied further. And so I'm looking forward to especially including studying the role of alumni networks in facilitating more access to internships for students in future iterations of our research. So lots of new directions to take this work.
Great. Thanks, Samya, and good suggestions in the chat here. I want to surface a question that sort of speaks to timing and high school students. So we have a couple questions from Brianna and Greg, but how can we better prepare high school students about the value of internships? How should students start to engage in this process early so that they can do internships in high school and in college?
Yeah, I think in reflecting on inroads and my experience there, I'm a little worried nationally that we're into a major tracking initiative where we want, students to pick the career they want to get into, whether the careers they have an option for are the ones that they want to do versus how do we equip them in different ways to be prepared for work and to explore and to learn and think and know what's expected. And so I think if there is a major program around internships and prep for that, it may take away this, no, we want them to go into HVAC and we'll give them work experiences and pay them versus, I didn't know what I wanted to do until I was 47. So, how do we give them some things in high school that get them prepped so then when they are in college and their internship opportunities, they know exactly what to do. So we may be getting it wrong in secondary ed where we're so specific on getting them into the job versus getting them to understand careers and their career goals.
Great. And Marshall, I'd love for you to weigh in here. And Marshall, you're on mute. Yep.
Sorry, I'll preface this by saying, in my senior year of high school, I did an internship at the St. Louis Economic Development Corporation, and now I work at the Bronx Economic Development Corporation as a college graduate. So there's been a pretty good degree of continuity between the career path that I sought out and where I'm working now. That being said, that was not my intention at all. My career path has not gone according to plan. And in some respects, I think that teaching 18-year-olds or 17-year-olds that they don't have to have their life figured out at 17 or 18 is that's an age-old thing that everyone on this call probably lived and experienced, and I don't think that we're going to change that in like a fundamental way. I think that that's something that's part of growing up, is thinking that you got to have yourself figured out. One way though that I think internships could be sold a whole lot better is to flip the perspective. And by that I mean, I think that a lot of students go into internships thinking that it's an opportunity to learn about the industry that they're interning in. And in many cases, the experience is going to be a very narrow experience of that industry. That's just the nature of that. I mean, if you have got limited experience, you're going to have limited exposure to the industry, and especially given the time that you're able to be there. That's not to say that you won't be exposed to the industry, but I think that the real value that you get from that experience in that 6 months that is oftentimes not spoken to is what you learn about yourself in a totally new environment that is so unlike any environment that you've been exposed to prior to that, because working as an intern at the company is so different from school, right? And so I think that, and you can, and whether or not you're someone who wants to be a biochemist and you're interning at an accounting firm, or you want to be an accountant and you're interning at a theater, the environment is going to be so much different. However, it's going to be, from a professional standpoint, it's going to be so much more similar to like the career that you're preparing yourself for. You're going to learn a lot about yourself that you wouldn't learn in any other context. And so I think that emphasizing that value to students is super important to getting students to see that, you may not find an internship that's exactly that thing that you're looking for, where, you're going to get the internship and then you'll become a first-year associate and work your way up to senior partner at this one organization. That may not be the path for you, but the things that you learn about yourself and how you work and the type, maybe I know I don't want to work at a big organization. I like being a part of a small team. I know I don't want to work in a professional services organization. I'd rather work for an organization that sells a product or a service. These are things that you can learn about yourself that at a firm or an organization that isn't directly aligned with the thing that you're interested in at the age of 18 or when you're in college of like 21, 23, which may not be the thing that you want to do in the first place anyway.
Right.
And that point is hard to get across to students because 18-year-olds have it figured out. Yeah, I think that flipping the perspective is one area where we've been talking about ROI. Flipping the perspective, there's a lot of ROI in that in terms of connecting students to internships.
What a wonderful way to finish us out, Marshall, thinking about it. Internships are not only career, but self-awareness and the benefits of gaining skills and confidence and social capital are really important. Thank you so much for your perspective. And I'm realizing how many expert practitioners and researchers and leaders we have on this webinar who have a deep commitment to internships and work-based learning and ensuring better outcomes for students, for employers, and for communities in which they live. Thank you so very much for joining us today. Please do join us to continue this conversation and build networks around those who are deeply committed to work-based learning through the LinkedIn posts that we've posted here. And again, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to continuing the conversation in our next public viewpoint and on LinkedIn. And a big thank you to our panelists here for joining and to Soumya for her great research. And we hope you all have a great day. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.